Hello and welcome to Sunday Night Conversations, brought to you by D1Baseball.com. I am your host, Michael Patrick Rooney. I want to say thanks to our sponsor, Netting Pros. Netting Pros specializes in the design, fabrication, and installation of custom netting and padding for college baseball programs all around the country. Next time your field or facility needs something new, whether that be netting, wall padding, L screens, or ball carts, make sure you check out our friends at Netting Pros. It's the perfect combination. These people love college baseball. They love baseball, period. They'll be at the convention, and their products are just phenomenal. So, again, thanks to the folks at Netting Pros. Before I introduce the guests, if this is your first Sunday night conversation with us, it's a 3-year-old program. A couple years ago, we did it just as a way to promote volunteer coaches in college baseball. Those guys work so hard behind the scenes, and it's a really fun way to meet some of the up-and-comers in our sport. And then, now we don't have volunteer coaches anymore, which is really awesome. And then last year, we just kind of had some fun with themes like catching, pitching, outfield play, offense, etc. And this year, I've just gotten totally selfish, and I've just come up with ideas that I'm super intrigued by and interested in. And that's tonight's one of those topics. So we've got Mitch Gaspard here. We've got Tim Jamieson. And these guys have incredible coaching resumes. And one of the interesting things that Mitch and Tim have in common is they are assistant coaches now. They've also been head coaches, and they've been head coaches in the SEC. And, I want to say this in the most respectful way possible. There is great college baseball played all over the country. We know that. Great players, great coaches, etc. The SEC is different. It just is. It's a different animal right now, and it's been that way for a little while. And these guys have experienced that in many ways. So let's jump in here. Mitch and Tim, it is so awesome. I am so excited for this. I was pumped for this thing. The hardest part of getting ready for the show was I always get about 4 or 5 questions, and then we run out of time. Man, I had Mitch, your 97 Alabama team, I think could be its own podcast. Tim, your 7 straight regionals could be its own podcast. I am going to probably ask you guys about that, but let's start here. And Mitch, I'll have you kick it off. I want you to just kind of bullet point your resume for us. Like, where'd you grow up? Where'd you play? What would have been your coaching stops along the way? And then Tim, I'll have you do the same thing.
Yeah, well, thank you, Mike. I grew up in Port Arthur, Texas. Went to high school, Port Arthur Thomas Jefferson. Was a football, baseball player there. And then my claim to fame at LSU, I was Skip Burtman's first signee
All right.
at LSU in 1983. Spent 2 years at LSU, and then a couple years at University of Houston. And then started my coaching there at Houston 1 year, and then UL Lafayette, which was USL at the time, Northwestern State, Alabama, did 2 stints at both of those, then Kansas State for a couple years, Georgia, and now to Louisiana Tech.
Awesome. All right, let me ask you a couple follow-up questions, Mitch. So you came to Alabama when Coach Wells had kind of got taken over there. He had been on Skip Burtman's staff, if I'm not mistaken, and really – you guys built Alabama into a absolute powerhouse. Tell us about. I feel like Coach Wells is probably not as famous as he should be in college baseball because it was kind of a quick burn. Tell us about Coach Wells. What was it like working for Coach Wells?
Well, one, Jim's always been very unique, but the absolute best prepared, best practice coach I've ever been around, and really all the knowledge I've gained, the majority of all of it has been from Jim. But the 2 stints, when I was at USL at the time, Southwestern Louisiana, Jim was just starting at Northwestern State. He was a one-man wrecking crew. Then Mike Bianco went with Jim as a grad assistant after Mike caught at LSU. And they made their first regional, and Jim had won his first Southland Conference title, and he was hot, So Jim, I would see him out on the road. I had a chance Dave Van Harn was at Texarkana Junior College, and I'm sitting in the stands recruiting a player. Coach Wells is there as well, and we just start talking. He said, "Hey, I think I'm going to get my first assistant at Northwestern State this summer. Would you have any interest in coming over?" And so I said, absolutely. And so I was at Lafayette at the time. I was that restricted earnings type coach, and so I was going from 16 to 18,000, to go to Northwestern State. But so go to Northwestern State for 2 years with Jim, and we won a conference championship, had a good run there. And then, believe it or not, Jim's dream job was here at Louisiana Tech. And so they ended up hiring at the time Mike Kane, and Jim was down in the dumps. We had just went to the regional at Oklahoma State, and we're there. Jim knocks on the door, and he said, "Hey, I've got a phone call from Hootie Ingram at University of Alabama, and they want me to come in and take a trip to Alabama." Well, boom, 2 or 3 days later, he ends taking the trip. He gets the job. But Jim was, I'm telling you, just a baseball guy through and through. And I think you said it earlier. His burn was quick, but it's because how hard he went, and it was just, everything. He had the Skip Bertman tree, or the Skip Bertman philosophy with all the things he did, but he just went above and beyond with all of it. It was the most prepared teams I've ever been around, and he just knew the ins and outs of everything about his club, and that was obvious just how quick he was able to turn the Alabama thing and get that thing rolling, and how hot it got for about 7 or 8 years, and then a couple more years after that. But it was a pretty special run there at Alabama from 94, 95 to about 2000, 2001.
Oh, that's awesome. Hey, one more, Mitch. So you leave LSU, you go to Houston, and Houston is also one of these programs that's got like this sneaky, awesome tradition. Like there's so many, I think even current coaches that somehow, some way, their lineage traces back to UH. Who were some of the people that you were around at UH?
Yeah, when I was in Houston, we had David Pierce, obviously was at University of Texas. David was the grad assistant at that time. The late John Altobelli was the other grad assistant at that time, who later went on to at Orange Coast in California. And David Denny, who was a great player at University of Texas. Rainer Noble, who was later the head coach at University of Houston. And so was very fortunate. Bragg Stockton was the head coach my senior year, Roland Walton my junior year there. So very fortunate just through both my playing career and coaching career, just all the great people, that I've been fortunate to be around, and all the knowledge just been able to suck up through all those years.
That's awesome. Very cool. All right, Coach Jay, let's do the same thing. Kind of bullet point us through your resume, if you don't mind.
My family moved to Columbia, Missouri when I was in the 7th grade, and lived pretty much there for quite a long period of time. But I ended up playing baseball at the University of New Orleans from 1978 to 81, and then went into become a graduate assistant right when I got done playing. And was very fortunate to be there at a time when, really before the SEC became the SEC, and we were one of the better programs in that part of the country. But I was there up until 1989 when Coach McCarter called me and wanted me to be the pitching coach at the University of Missouri, which I did for 6 years. Then he retired, and fortunate enough to become the head coach, which I did for 22 years before I got out of coaching for a little while, and got back into it about 5 years ago at Southern Illinois University to be a pitching coach. And then Coach Jackson, the current head coach at Missouri, called me, wanted me to go with him to Memphis, which I did. And, things have turned. So now he's come back to Missouri and brought me with him, and things have become full circle.
That's awesome. Hey, Coach Jay, when you were at SIU, did Lance Rhodes never coach for you, right? Like you guys, but you obviously knew him because you were covering the games and announcing some of the games, right?
No, he is actually a player in a St. Louis amateur, one of the travel teams that we recruited. Max Scherzer and a bunch of different guys came from that team. And Lance was a good pitcher and a guy that we really wanted to have, but ended up not going that direction. So I've known Lance for a long time, but we got to know each other better when he was the assistant here under Coach Beazer, and then, like you said, covering the games. And the irony of it is, I tried very hard to get back in the game for 2+ years, and I couldn't get anything. And Coach Jackson and Coach Rhodes had the same agent, and I'd pretty much given up. I wasn't going to be able to get anything. And Coach Jackson calls me and says, "Hey, listen, SIU's pitching job's open. You interested?" And I said, "Yeah." 5 minutes later, I got a call from Lance. And 5 minutes after that, I was the pitching coach at Southern Illinois. And so it just needed to create the awareness that I wanted to get back in.
I'm kind of torn, Coach Shay, because I like you back in the game coaching. That's good for college baseball, but I do miss your broadcast because I always got smarter as someone watching the games, hearing you talk about pitching. Hey, let me take you back to UNO for a second. So, you were teammates with Paul Maneri there. Coach Maestri is, to me, like he took UNO to Omaha. Like he's very famous. Like this is a Hall of Famer. What was Coach Maestri doing back then that let that program be so successful?
Well, he worked hard at recruiting. And again, like I mentioned, it was the only really good baseball program in the SEC during those years was Mississippi State. Now, even LSU was coached by a football assistant coach, and that was pretty common. And so he just worked harder than everybody else, and he recruited better than anybody else. And then, he had the flair that Ron Frazier had at Miami. He was a promoter, and we made money in baseball, and the crowds are incredible. And it was a destination for a lot of kids. He recruited the Midwest where he was from, and then the kids from Louisiana, and it ended up being a really good mix.
That's awesome. All right, cool. Hey, so Mitch, let me come back to you. I'm going to kind of carve your guys' coaching careers into two halves. And now you guys can take me wherever you want on this, but when I look at your career, Mitch, I feel like when you were an assistant at Alabama under Coach Wells, and you guys kind of took Alabama, I don't. If I'm being 100% candid, I have no idea where Alabama was on the college baseball map before you guys got there. They could have been fine. They could have been good. I know they weren't elite, right? Like I know they weren't like a national brand. And then, the 97 team, right? Like you guys are in the national title game. So yeah, what was that? And it felt like your first year at Alabama was a pretty significant turnaround. Like the year before, 94 had not gone well, and then you guys got on the map pretty quickly. Yeah, I'd love for you to describe for us like kind of what that experience, your first time in Alabama as an assistant, was like.
Well, when we walked in, Mike, and Barry Schallenberger had some good years at Alabama, but it was a little bit up and down, and that had been coming off a couple rough years, and that's when they obviously hired Jim, and we came in the season 94, 95, and there was a mix of some guys on that team really that were fairly talented guys, but they were hungry and they wanted to win. And Jim came in, and hey, right off the bat, within a month, he cut one of the best players on the team, and he kind of put his foot in the sand and said, hey, this is the way it's going to be, and this is how we're going to run this program. And really just the discipline started taking over. And we had some tough moments, throughout the year, but, we got hot, Mike, probably 3/4 of the way, into the year. We were at Notre Dame, and I remember we got beat, and actually Paul Maneri was the coach at the time at Notre Dame. We were out there for a Tuesday, Wednesday game, and we got beat. It was like 4-1 on a Tuesday night that, most guys just pack up the bags and say, hey, it's a Tuesday night loss. We'll try to get them on Wednesday. And this is like game 40, in the year. I mean, we're almost 3/4 of the way through. And hey, Jim said, hey, right field line. And this was back in the day you could do that. And so we get on the right field line, and we ran 50 wind sprints. We had a roughly, 40-yard wind sprints at the time. And so, because I remember, I was on one line starting them, and Todd Butler, who was the other, was on the other line. And after every 10, Jim would give them a talk and say, every good team, you've got to win at least 40 games. And that's how many sprints we're going to run. But that night, we got back, and whatever it was, that group just really came together, and we beat Notre Dame the next day. We go to LSU. We win 2 out of 3, and we really get on a run. And the crazy thing is we get to the conference tournament, and I can't remember. I think we're about the 5th or 6th seed, and that's when the conference tournaments were hosted at the site. Mississippi State was the host site that year, and we won every game in the bottom of the 9th by a run to win the conference tournament. And we were down 3 in the championship game to LSU, and ended up scoring 4 runs in the bottom of the 9th to win, and then go to the regional. We went to Clemson that year in our first year and made it to the finals. Chris Benson beat us in the finals that year. But really that triggered the run. And because we had a few of those guys back, and then we added more recruits that year to that group. And then, so the 96 team went to Omaha. And the 97 team was by far the best team I've ever been a part of, and played for the national championship, and then went again in 99. So, but we'll all say the 95 team is the one that really triggered that run and established just some identity of who we're going to be and how we're going to play. And it was a very hard-nosed blue-collar culture there. And, Jim just really set the mark with that first team, and they responded. There was some really tough group of kids that, really built that thing and got it rolling in the right direction.
That's awesome. Hey, so the 97 team, Mitch, I recall you guys having a ton of power, like that was the Gorilla Ball era. I think Brandon Larson hit 40 home runs that year for LSU. And if I read it correctly, you guys had played each other 6 times. The national title game was the 6th time, and you guys were 3-3. But you also played it without Roberto Vaz. I never know how to say it. Is it Vaz or Vaz? How do you say it?
Vaz, yeah, Roberto
Vaz, yeah. So tell me about that rivalry, you guys in LSU that year, because it seems like you guys had some Donniebrooks.
Well, we had, I'll go all the way back. Vaz was the one guy that could talk to Jim and was very comfortable. But Roberto was from Brooklyn, so he had a little swagger about him and pretty comfortable in his skin. So that year, LSU ended up hitting 193 home runs. I think we had like 184 in 97. It was crazy. And so LSU had a little bit of kryptonite facing left-handers. And Vaz had been mainly our closer, but we started him occasionally. So anyway, it's Tuesday, Wednesday. Myself, Todd, and Jim, we're in the office, and we're talking, kind of breaking down the series. We needed to sweep LSU to win the SEC outright. 2 out of 3 meant we would share the title. And so when we get a knock at the door, and so open up the door, it's Roberto. And so, Jim's going, "Hey, what do you need, Roberto?" He said, "Hey, if you want to win Friday night, give me the ball." He said, "I'll get Friday night's game. We got to figure out Saturday and Sunday." And so Jim, in typical fashion, said, "Yeah, all right, Roberto, shut the door." And so as soon as he shuts the door, "Hey, what do y'all think?" So he said, "Absolutely, give him the ball." So crazy thing is, he goes, I think he went CG. It makes good for the story. I know he went at least 7. Hits a 2-run homer late. We end up winning the game like 6-7-2 on Friday. Well, Saturday we come out, and that was the game we beat them like 28-2. It was incredible. And Thompson started for LSU. Well, he was out of the game in the bottom of the first or bottom of the second. I mean, it was a game where balls are hitting sprinkler heads, bouncing over the shortstop, just crazy stuff going on. So we go into Sunday, and we sweep. We win the conference outright. They beat us. We split it. And it's a great game. And I believe it was the 8th inning. Kerner hit a 2-run homer. I think Furness hit one early. And so LSU ends up winning that game. And Thompson comes back in that game and ends up going 4 innings and is dynamite. He's got a big 12-6 hammer and strikes out, 6 or 7. But great game. Kerner hits the home run. LSU, so we split the title. And then we beat them once, I believe it was one time for sure in the conference tournament. We ended up winning the conference tournament that year. And the key in Omaha was Roberto Vaz. We're playing Southern Cal in, as Tim said earlier, that was still the 6-team regional. And so we've got Southern Cal in the championship games, got to beat us twice. And there is a white baseball on the white chalk line during batting practice. Vaz hits the ball, comes out of the box, steps on the baseball, and ends up breaking his ankle before the championship game of the regional, and knocks him out for obviously that game. And Matt Frick, who was catcher, ends up walking off Southern Cal, who was a hell of a team. I think they won it the next year, and sending us to Omaha. But Roberto, not only did we lose our 3-0 hitter, but we lost one of our main bullets, both out of the pen or starting, however we wanted. He had the absolute best single year I've ever been a part of. I think it was something like 4-10 with 22 and 8-2 on the mound with 6-7 saves. It was an absolute incredible year.
That's awesome. And plus, like the just the confidence, like you mentioned, like you lose a guy like that, it's almost like the team spirit animal. That's, oh man.
Oh, he was full of swagger.
Yeah. So great. The Brooklyn. Hey, Coach Jay. So I'm gonna split your Missouri time, your Mizzou time into two parts. Like, so you started there. When you first took over, as I understand it, you guys are in the Big 8, then you're in the Big 12, and if you guys are in the Big 8 this time when Oklahoma State is on this crazy run. Oklahoma State had won the Big 8 14 years in a row. I mean, it's crazy to win it 14 times, let alone 14 consecutive years. So your second year, as I understand it, you guys win the Big 8, and then you had that. I think the most famous part of your stretch in the Big 12 is you guys go to 7 straight regionals in that stretch. I think it was 2003 to 2009. You could go wherever you want with this, but I'm really curious about that stretch where you guys went to 7 straight regionals, because that is just so hard to do. You guys won that Pepperdine, that Malibu regional to go to a super regional. But what was the difference when you guys went to those 7 straight regionals? What was the key there?
Well, you'll remember the name Ian Kinsler, because you helped us kind of foster that deal. But Jace Tingler and Ian Kinsler were on the 2003 team, and we had the year previous we had a lot of freshmen that we ended up playing, much like in 96 when we won the Big 8. 95 we struggled, but we played a lot of freshmen that year and benefited it the following year. So in 2003 we benefited from having played freshmen in 2002, but Kinsler and Tingler were just took over that team, and they got us on the run, and through the beginning of that 7-year run. But then after that, we had really good arms. I mean, we had in that stretch, we ended up having 3 first-round pitchers that ended up pitching for us. But we played really well. We were a team that embraced what Missouri is, and quite honestly, the weather doesn't cooperate, and it was good to have teams from Texas come up and play us in Columbia because they didn't want to be here. And we used it, and we had kids that bought into that, and we had a tenacious group of guys that just competed. But again, during that stretch, Scherzer, I would always tell the story. In 2004 regional, we went to Arkansas, and at that time Scherzer was a freshman. He didn't pitch in the regional, and then in 2005 we went to Fullerton and played in the regional. And I had a guy named Doug Mathis. He didn't pitch in the regional. Both those guys ended up pitching in the big league. So, I can't be given a whole lot of credit, because who knows what might have happened if I pitched those two guys. But in Max's second year in 2006 or 2005, he had dominated. But during that year, we had other guys that ended up playing at the big league level. But the year that you talked about in Malibu was 2006. That was the year we were the last team in. And it was probably the best talent that I had in the entire time that I was here. We had Scherzer, his junior year, ended up being a first-round draft pick. Aaron Crow was a freshman. He ended up being a first-round draft pick. Just about everybody on the field made it to AAA or the big leagues, and it was just a really good team that didn't come together until the end of the year. And we were literally the last team selected. And we go to Malibu and play UCLA and Pepperdine, and we lose our first game. Max gets beat the first game against Pepperdine, and so we have to win 4 in a row to win the regional. And then we played Irvine the next game, and that was Coach Serrano. We ended up playing 13 innings, and we were the visiting team. We had 2 1-2-3 double plays that we executed extra innings to continue to play, and so we ended up winning the game in 13. And the next day, I throw a guy named Rick Zagoni, who was a freshman. He beats UCLA 2-1 in a complete game. Come back that night, and we throw Aaron Crow, who had not won a game yet. He throws a complete game against Pepperdine. and come back the next day, and we start our closer, and he goes 4 2/3, and Max was warming up the ninth, never had to come into the game because we scored enough runs, but that was, an ending of a regional that we never expected. And in 2007, we ended up hosting, and honestly, that was probably their best chance to get to Omaha. 2008 was a very similar team. That was Crow's the year that he ended up being National Pitcher of the Year, and Kyle Gibson was a freshman in 2007, ended up being a first-round draft pick. So we are very fortunate during that stretch. I'm sure Mitch can attest to this, is we held on to the high school kids who got drafted.
Mm-hmm.
They ended up coming to school, and that really allowed us to have what we needed to have to keep that thing going.
Were Scherzer, Aaron Crow, and Kyle Gibson, were they all drafted high school players that just said no to the draft, or were any of them a little under the radar in recruiting?
Well, Scherzer was, I think, a 30th round pick.
Mm-hmm.
Probably, and Max was, if you see him in high school, it's certainly not what he is now. He's come so far in where he was high school and freshman year. So he was drafted on projection, but not certainly on performance. Gibson was, I think, a 36 rounder out of high school, and we had to work hard to keep him. I had to convince his dad that we put some weight on him, and they didn't believe me, but fortunately we did that. But then Crow was undrafted out of high school. And in all honesty, with those three guys, he ended up having the best college career of the three, and ended up being a first-round draft pick twice.
That's awesome. And where were those kids from? Scherzer's a St. Louis kid, right?
Right. Kyle is from a town just east of Indianapolis, and then Crow is from a town called Wakarusa, Kansas, which is just right outside of Topeka.
Oh, that's awesome. Oh, so cool. I know I've told this story no less than 100 times this year, because I feel like the January transfer thing is a topic that's surfacing, and I couldn't be more against that whole, mid-year transfer thing for a million reasons. But Ian Kinsler is one of those reasons, because we worked so hard to get him to school, and we brought him in January because we were panicked about Dustin Pedroia playing shortstop as a freshman. That looks very idiotic looking back. And poor Ian, like he comes in January, and that means somebody's got to go to the bench, and great kid, great player, it's just, I don't know, I don't want to take us down that tangent, but that was, felt like that was really unfair to him. And then I remember when he was going to your guys' place, just thinking, I might have even said it. I think I can't remember if it was Evan Pratt who I talked to on that one, but I just remember thinking, man, like we are dumb people. Like God bless you guys. Like, yeah.
Well, I've always asked the question how you couldn't find room for both those guys in your infield, but fortunately, Kinsler ended up not playing a whole lot. And a quick story about him, that we learned a lot about our guys when the weather gets cold. And that fall that he was in here was a really cold fall. And Ian's from Tucson, and so we didn't know how he's going to handle that. And you'd never know it. You'd never, like, he played the same way regardless of the conditions and the circumstances. And how mentally tough he is. And he's just a phenomenal player. But we knew right there we had something special, because he handled all the elements that all of our guys had to handle, and he did it and performed at a very high level.
Yeah, great. Yeah, he's just great. Like one of those kids where you just feel like, man, you couldn't be more thrilled to see that, a kid overcome that, and yeah, super awesome. Hey, before we go to the second part, round 2 of the head coaching part, I want to say thanks to pitchLogic, another one of the sponsors for the show. pitchLogic is the system used by players, coaches, scouts, and instructors at all levels of play, from youth leagues to the big leagues. It's easy to use, affordable technology. It makes the platform accessible to every player at every level of the sport. All the metrics and features that are used in the major league game. See pitchlogic.com for more information. Again, that's pitchlogic.com. And thank you to those guys for, again, making this possible. All right, guys, so let's keep moving forward. So let's talk about being a head coach in the SEC. We said it on our regular D1 baseball podcast recently that the SEC is one of those leagues where every day is code red, right? Like every day is DEFCON 1. The league is so nuclear in a positive way. Like it's just a dead sprint at all times. And all the leagues are like that. But I think the SEC is, you take every aspect and just ratchet it up. So Mitch, let me start with you. You can go wherever you want with this, but I'm curious, you've lived it. I have not. What is the life of an SEC head coach, and how did you experience it?
Well, with the exception of a few, I mean, the lifespans, if you're fortunate, 10 to 15 years. I know, Mike and a few others have been able to spend a good amount of time. I remember, it was South Carolina.
Coach Tanner?
Coach Tanner. I'm drawing a blank. Coach Tanner came up, and this was my first year as the head coach, and Jim had just put in his time, and so Coach Tanner, he said, well, hey, this is year 14 for me. And he said, 15 is about the lifespan at that time. And so, of course, he goes on and runs off 2 national championships, before he retires and moved into the new stadium. But it's, it's hard to say, the part with the SEC, and I think even more so, and it just keeps building, because even when I first got there as an assistant in 94, 95, as Tim mentioned, it was very selective. Teams were at that time were, really committed to the game. And so I think within my time there, you saw obviously Mississippi State with Ron Polk's always had that commitment, but I think you've seen with quite a few others. Obviously LSU went that direction, Ole Miss with Mike, and not to mention, others, but it was very obvious, who made that financial commitment and just how this, just from the ballparks, the crowds, just how everything exploded, at that time. And even just the crowds themselves. You knew if you were going to State or LSU, you were going to play in front of a packed house. But by the time, as a head coach later, pretty well everywhere you went, you were playing in front of a sold out venue, and it was going to be a pretty hostile crowd, and it was going to be a beautiful ballpark. And even now, being at Louisiana Tech, we play a lot of the SEC, and, we'll play some midweek, we'll play some early on in the season. And it's really incredible just to see the amount of talent, that they're able to accumulate year after year, but also just the commitment that's there to their baseball program. And obviously the venues that you play in, and just the coaches, and just when you put it all together, it's pretty incredible just what the SEC has become in baseball and the commitment that they've made in that sport. And I think that's why you have, year in, year out, you've got those teams winning national championships now.
So, Mitch, let me ask you this. So, you mentioned the facilities and the venues, and it is crazy. I remember having this conversation recently where it's like, if you play Mississippi State in the postseason at night, you're basically playing in a haunted house. If you play at Arkansas, it's like they're having a baseball game in the infield of the Daytona 500. LSU is like that. They're the original gangsters, that crowd. It's like that place is, you can feel the stadium shaking. And I could go, Ole Miss has got the beer showers. Texas A&M, your poor freshman. Don't even bring freshman pitchers to A&M, right? Like ball 5, ball 6. Just like you guys just are charting this weekend. Like you're not ready for this. So, and I could just keep ripping through the league. South Carolina, now Florida.
Yeah, you can go on and on. Yeah.
It's crazy. So when you took over at Alabama, you guys didn't. My perception is you didn't have that. Now the Joe now is gorgeous and top line. Was when you were trying to get Alabama to make a big investment in a baseball facility like that, was it just like, hey, you guys need to come on one road trip with me and you'll know what I'm talking about? Or were they already savvy to that and they just need a little bit of time to raise the funds?
Well, I think it was kind of twofold. I think a lot of it started, obviously Jim Wells had a vision of what needed to happen. And it didn't happen in the timely fashion, under Jim that it needed to. And so when I took over, really was on the heels of what Jim had kind of started there and where it needed to go. And so fortunately, the commitment was made, and we had about a 2-year fundraising project, obviously, that helped out with it. And then by the plan, the time of the plans and the building and all, it was, we ended up, which was my last year at Alabama, was our first year in the new ballpark. And that was something I was very proud of, that and I felt like it could certainly get them back where they needed to be. And I think, and it honestly been a long time Alabama guy, and it always means a lot to me there. And my two daughters graduated from Alabama, and just what they did for me in my career. It was pretty awesome last year to watch them host the regional in Tuscaloosa and see that ballpark filled up and see them have success. So that was nice. I know it was a long time coming. I know their fans were hungry for that, and but it's a beautiful ballpark. They did a great job with it. But in that league now, they're just one, of many that they're already probably middle of the pack as far as it goes to ballparks now.
Yeah, it's crazy. Like that's part of the deal, right? If you're a player and you get drafted by the Tampa Bay Rays, then your best home facilities are behind you. No offense to the Rays, right? Like the Rays would be the 11th best facility in the SEC. It's just right. It's not to mention crowd, attendance numbers. So hey, so Coach Day, let's you ushered Mizzou into the SEC, and I want to be careful here. Like the Big 12 is, was and will be one of the elite baseball leagues historically, currently, etc. I mean, you came from a great league and then you went into the SEC. Ironically, your third year at Mizzou, you went 15-15 in the regular season, and that's still the best regular season win total for Mizzou in the time they've been in the SEC. But from your perspective, what was it like transitioning Mizzou from Big 12 to the SEC, and what does make the league so unique, the SEC?
Well, probably the first thing, Mike, is that we weren't prepared to go into to make that move. We thought we'd had we did. We had success in the Big 12, and we the transition that we made was we didn't realize just how difficult of a grind the 30-game schedule is. The Big 12 at that time was 24 games, and so you had 2 bye weekends during the season, so you had kind of time to catch your breath. And one of the biggest differences is that there are always going to be some teams in the bottom half of the Big 12 that you could go in there knowing you're going to win 2 games. And in the SEC, there's no weekend that you can expect that. And so you got 10 weekends against teams that you just got to battle your butt off just to win 1 game, not to mention 2 games. But the athleticism on the field was a shock for me. The balls that got through in the Big 12 did not get through the infield in the SEC. The balls that got into the gaps in the Big 12 were run down in the SEC. And then, of course, the back end of the game, the starting pitching wasn't that much different, but from the middle of the game to the back end of the game, completely different in terms of talent and particularly arm talent. The coaches prepared their teams to play at a high level. We could always count on, like I mentioned earlier, that the team from Texas would come into Columbia in a cold weekend and we kicked their butt because they didn't want to be here. We've had plenty of teams come to Columbia from the SEC in cold weekends, and they still play their butts off. And so it's just it's a completely different animal. And like we've already mentioned, the commitment to the facilities, but beyond that, it's the recruiting, right? The talent of players that you get to come to the SEC. All you got to do is look at the draft lists and where the players are coming from, and now with the NIL and all the other resources that are out there, it has separated the SEC even that much more. But even since I was in the SEC, my last year was 2016. That was before launch angle. That was before spin rate. That was before synergy. And now every SEC program has somebody on analytics or multiple people analytics in the program. And so the resources just keep growing and the separation gets wider and wider.
Yep. It's so interesting. Yeah, it's I'll never forget when you were saying that, Coach Jay. Tom Hart, is a Como native and obviously just a premier broadcaster in the SEC and is a guy that loves college baseball. But I'll never forget him saying when this all started, he said the SEC network has become the national network for college baseball. And I think that's it's like whatever all the variables that we have in college baseball, the SEC is all in on every single one of them. There's not one that they're not checking that box and trying to be the best in facility, best in recruiting, best in preparation, best in just every single item.
Other thing, Mike, too, and I apologize for
no, you're good.
Cutting you off, but Mitch can attest to this. When I first got in the league, baseball, and probably still is, baseball was the number 2 sport behind football. Yeah. And basketball, I think, has caught up. Maybe most of the programs, but you could point at the vast majority of the schools in the SEC generated more revenue in baseball than they did in basketball. And that's, I mean, how unique is that, right? And so that kind of, in a microcosm, that tells you exactly what the league's about.
Yep. Very cool. Yeah, it's awesome. It's like what's that expression? They only tackle the guy with the ball. And I'm on a lot of podcasts where I catch myself picking at the SEC, and it's just because like my guiding principle in my college baseball life is this: we need to celebrate what the SEC has done for our sport and how passionate the league is about our sport. But we also can't let the SEC suffocate the rest of the sport, right? Like that's the middle ground we got to find, where we can't let the SEC run so far past everybody else that that we create a mess for ourselves. So that's an easy thing to say out loud. It's a hard thing to do. Let's do this, you guys. So you guys have had the unique experience of being head coaches at the highest level of our sport, and now you've gone back to be assistant coaches. And Coach Jay, you alluded to it. It took a couple years for that to happen for you. You guys have both done incredible jobs. I mean, you guys were no-brainers for the show, because I can't think of two guys that are more well-respected in our sport than you two are. And so I want to, I guess I'll phrase the question this way, and I'll start with you, Mitch. Like, what's been the funnest part of going from head coach to assistant coach? What have been the joys of, because we all know the head coach is it's a tricky gig, right? Like, it's the biggest chair. You're a CEO. The further you get up the totem pole, the further you get away from the players in some ways. So you can go wherever you want with this, but I guess that's the nature of the question: is what's the funnest part or the most joyous part of being an assistant coach?
Well, for me, Mike, it's really the relationships again. As an assistant, you're really close to the players. I mean, one, you recruit them. Two, when they come in, you kind of hang out with them a little bit, you jab at them, you coach them hard, you do all the stuff, but you build such a close relationship with every kid, and particularly the guys in your position area. And, as the head coach, as you mentioned, hey, you're writing out that lineup every day, and you're always a little bit cautious of how close you're going to get to each kid. And so that, for me, being an assistant again has just, man, it has been a blast. It really has. I've enjoyed just everything about it. And so, and honestly, landing here at Louisiana Tech has been probably 4 or 5 years the most fun I've had coaching. And so I think, one, which I love, we're very blue collar and very mid-major, but we're sexy mid-major. I mean, the guys like it here, and we play the big boys, and we try to knock them off and enjoy it. And so that's really Lane's personality here. But it's really, it all boils down to the relationships. I mean, and I do feel like as an assistant, I think you're just a lot closer to the kids. You're a lot more involved, and now I'm more the old man in the dugout. So you try to be that wise owl, and where you try to give them just all the years of experience that you have, and you do coach a little. I've coached a little bit different, as I've gotten older, and I think you just have a lot more knowledge than you once have, but it's more about trying to impact these guys, because really at this point, and Tim probably would tell you the same thing. The chase is kind of over with for me. I mean, I'm not trying to be the head coach I'm just enjoying the hell out of every day, going to work and working with the guys that I work with and the players that I'm with every day. So it's been a blast here, but it really boils down just those relationships with the guys every day.
That's awesome. Hey, one follow-up, Mitch. By the way, Steven Schock, who is such a fun person in our sport, he's got a new term. He said, we're not calling them mid-majors anymore. We're calling them grit factories. And now, but I liked your expression, sexy mid-major. So I don't know, sexy grit factory feels like a contradiction in terms. I'll have to workshop that with Steven. So, you guys, like you mentioned, Louisiana Tech is a killer baseball program. I mean, that regional you guys hosted in 2021, it just looks like a super fun park. I do want to ask you about this. In 2020, you went to Georgia to be Scott Strickland's assistant coach. And I've wondered about this, and you guys would both fit this criteria where, there's the pressure, the SEC is the big leagues of college baseball, and the pressure is so enormous. that guys like you that, there's not that many people walking around the planet Earth that have sat in those chairs, and you two have. And like in the big leagues, we have bench coaches. And will we start to see more of that? What was that like, Mitch? Like just that 1 year at Georgia? Hey, Strick did it with Pete Hughes, I think the year after. But was it kind of like that? You were almost like a bench coach, or did it feel more like you were a traditional assistant coach?
Yeah, no, it was definitely, and actually I followed Pete. Pete was there the year prior to me. And so Strick had called, and we had a relationship, obviously, through time I was at Bama and he was at Georgia. And so Strick called, and so I went there as the volunteer coach for a year and tried to be a sounding board and just help anywhere I could. I mean, Scott Daly and Sean Kinney were the two assistants. They were great, and we were really good that year. I had a tremendous pitching staff, and had an older club that was returning, and it was just a hell of a team. And that was the year Florida State got so hot. Mike Martin's last year, and they beat us in the regional. But had a lot of fun with Strick. Loved Georgia, and he was great. But yeah, we would. I think when like for Scott, knowing I had been in that chair before, he would ask me some questions and different things that he knew. And in the spot I was in, I could comfortably give him the answers, that
Sure.
At least in my opinion of what I thought it would be and how it would work. And it was a nice year because we won a lot, so it wasn't too many tough conversations. So it was like, hey, we're going to pitch Hancock today or Tony Losi, so
Yeah.
like, well, hell, both of them, are pretty good. So but no, it was great. And, and really that's what kind of led me to Tech here, because Lane and I, had a good relationship when he was at State. And Lane, timing's everything for all of us. And Lane was in the process of building a new stadium, which we had just come off of at Alabama. They had went through a tornado here in Ruston that tore down the stadium. And so with our relationship and all, it just worked out great. Where from Georgia here to La Tech, I was closer to home. My two daughters one was in Dallas, one was in Baton Rouge. We were right in the middle of them. So it worked out great. It was the best move I've made. Like I said, this has just been a dynamite stop, and just have loved it so much here in Ruston.
That's awesome. Hey, Coach Jay. So similar question, but let me frame it up this way. So you get back, you leave broadcasting, you get back into it, you go to SIU with Lance, and you guys have immediate success. I mean, it was like, wow, okay, dang it. Like this is, and then, you start putting two and two together. It's like, well, yeah, like that makes sense. Like Coach Jay had awesome pitching staffs when he was the head coach at Missouri. And then you go with Carrick to Memphis. And I remember talking to Kendall and Aaron Fitt, and we were like, oh man, Carrick, man, this guy can really sell, right? Like this is a good sign. Carrick just pulled Coach Jay out of Southern Illinois. That is well played, Carrick. And so, but same question, Coach Jay, like what would have been the most fun parts of kind of going from that head coaching role to back to working with the Arms?
Well, I think Mitch hit it right on the head. I think a lot of it has to do with the relationships that you have with the players, and then also with the other coaches. And when I went to Southern Illinois, the coaching staff, Lance was the oldest coach besides myself, and he was 33, 34 years old. And so I had a young staff that I had the opportunity to mentor as well, and I really enjoyed that. But I think as much as anything, when I got into coaching, in the first place, I got into it because I loved to teach, and I loved the game of baseball, and loved to compete. Look forward to going to work every day because it was that simple. And then as you become the head coach and as you get older, your distance gets greater from between you and the players, and not something you do on purpose, but it just kind of happens. But then you get pulled, and your energy and your focus gets pulled in so many different directions that a lot of the joy, and I don't know, Mitch, you feel the same way, but a lot of the joy disappeared. Particularly my last 4 or 5 years at Missouri is just,
Absolutely.
It just wasn't that much fun. And I didn't get into this game to make money or to chase national championships. I mean, great if it happens, but that's certainly not why I got into it. And so getting the opportunity to go to Southern Illinois and work with Lance was heaven on earth, because what I did every day is I prepared the pitchers individually, collectively, and I fixed the mounds. Okay, that's what I did. And so I didn't have to deal with all the other stuff. Recruiting is recruiting, but but at the same time, I didn't have to do a lot of that. And then when Carrick asked me to go to Memphis, it's because of our relationship. You know, what we shared together at Missouri when he was my assistant coach, and so it was an opportunity to help him. And then the same thing back here. This was not an easy decision to come back here, Mike. I mean, there's a lot of hidden demons too that I have to overcome. And I didn't really want to coach the SEC. I was very happy in the Missouri Valley. And it's just a level that, where you could go out there. We didn't have to deal with the draft, didn't have to deal with advisors. We just coached baseball and had, like Mitch said, just enjoyed being around all the people that were involved in the program. But, it's come full circle, and hopefully we can make a difference here, and I can leave it a better place than the last time I left it.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's very fair what you're saying about just those other. I think that's why I'm passionate about making sure that we don't leave those other levels of Division I baseball behind, because they're so awesome. Like there are kids having great experiences everywhere. There are big leaguers coming from everywhere. I hope that never changes. All right, let's do this one final question. So you guys have both coached in super regionals as a head coach. I've only coached in a super regional as an assistant coach. And I said this, I think, on the last podcast, where I don't know that I breathed that entire weekend. The pressure was so out of control. And I don't think my wife, Jenny, the oxygen wasn't coming easily to her either. You're an assistant coach. You're thinking, man, the difference between Omaha on the resume and not Omaha on the resume feels very significant. It does not feel like small print. So yeah, Mitch, you go first, and then Coach Jay. What was your experience like being a skipper in a super regional?
Well, one, we went in on a pretty good high, obviously, as you always do going into super regional, but we had beat Georgia Tech that year in the regional. It was really good. And so we go into Clemson, and, we had Jimmy Nelson, who was a big leaguer, pitched for the Brewers, Dodgers, and Josh Rutledge was our shortstop, and had a really, really good club. And so to beat Georgia Tech in the regional, we Nathan Kilcrease, who we call Peanut, who was 5'7" right-hander, who, ultimate competitor, could really pitch. Well, we had to overthrow him to win the regional, and he was all for it. And so we ended up starting Nelson, and we beat Clemson in game one. So we're one win away, and we've got Adam Morgan going in game two. He's a big leaguer who pitched in the bullpen for the Phillies, but we ended up getting beat the next two games and didn't win it. But that was my first year as the head coach, and it was really, you just kind of get it in that mode, where you're just coaching each game, and it's. But yeah, I think after each game, then you're going, hey man, we got a chance to go to. We're one win away, and so I remember we go down to the lobby in game two, the super. And all of a sudden you start seeing people from the university that you never see. And then, so, the game's pretty significant,
Sure.
that night. And but yeah, it was, it certainly can be nerve wracking and at the same time enjoyable to obviously to get to that point. You've accomplished a lot, and your guys have played really well to get to that moment. And you certainly want to see them accomplish that. And being in Omaha, multiple times as an assistant, how much fun it is, and how much you carry that with you, for your coaching career and just what you're doing even off the field. And you want your guys to experience that as well. But we fell a little bit short that year, but still, I mean, even with that, it was just a blast to be and give yourself that opportunity.
Yeah, it's one of the reasons why I think the 32 hosts is also very attractive to me. Not just where everything's a 3-game series until Omaha. It's also because I feel like you win a regional, and sometimes your school is just getting wind of how good you are, and then next thing you know, the super regionals on you, and then it's over. It's I like the idea of teams that are having these magic runs, stretching it out a little bit so the school can get more excited about it. So
Well, Mike, I can tell you that the year here, we hosted the regional, and North Carolina State came in. We had Rider, Alabama, and North Carolina State here. And it wasn't just our fan base, our entire city rallied around the regional and our team. But not only that, as North Carolina State was just smoking hot and we're so good, but our fan base really kind of joined into North Carolina State as they went to Arkansas. And, everyone here was pulling for North Carolina State, and just because they had just watched them, the week earlier. But it did so much just to promote college baseball in the city of Ruston and really North Louisiana. Because even though LSU's huge in the state of Louisiana, North Louisiana is a little different than South Louisiana. And so, because we get a little bit of that Arkansas crowd here all the way to Shreveport. But just to your point, I mean, the ability to have people like Louisiana Tech and Ruston host a regional, it just means so much for just the game itself and what it meant, obviously for our program moving forward. But I think just that's so important for college baseball.
Totally agree. Coach Jay, do you mind if I reroute your question? Like, I actually would like to get your take on that, like what it did for your program hosting in 2007. I had actually forgotten about that, but man, yeah, yeah. What's your take on that aspect of getting a chance to host?
Well, again, Mitch was right on, because we had people that came to those games that had never seen a Missouri baseball game, and not just in Columbia but throughout the state. And being the University of Missouri, it meant a lot to a lot of different people. So the crowd in our stadium at that time was minuscule, and we didn't have the facility that's in place now, which is again in dire need of more seats. But it was just a phenomenal experience in terms of just the excitement and the energy that was captured. And coming off of the year before, when we did win a regional, we were in Malibu for the regional, and then we played in Fullerton for the super regional. And so we didn't get a chance to go home. Stayed in California. So the players didn't get the opportunity to share in that excitement that year. And that's one of my biggest regrets, is that we didn't have the opportunity to come back home and be celebrated to a certain degree, because I think they would have appreciated that and would have meant a lot more to them. But no, it's what happened in 2007 here was just an incredible experience, and I'll never forget it. The rest and it's just something that it was such a big deal for everybody involved in athletics, but for people that, for the former players and everybody, just be able to come back and participate in an opportunity to go to Omaha.
Coach Shea, were they just putting bodies everywhere? Like, where were they putting the people when you guys were hosting the regional?
I mean, everywhere. There were they set up at that time. Our batting cages were down the left field line. They put bleachers in the batting cages. They had they had standing room only throughout the stadium. I've got a picture a panoramic picture that was taken from the outfield, so you can see where everybody's sitting. But it was just absolutely incredible. And that's another one of my biggest regrets, is not, we should have won that regional and we didn't. And like I said, that was probably our best chance to get to Omaha, because we would have ended up playing Oklahoma State and we would have hosted, and we'd already beaten them 4 times in that year. And so, you just have to and there's some coaching decisions that I made that I regret, and you got to live with.
Yeah, man, those postseasons, we take those with us to our grave. That is, that's why, like, after Super Regional weekend and during squeeze play, it's like the week after regionals and particularly Super Regionals, I'm 50% melancholy, 50% like elated, right? Like for the teams that are going to Omaha, it's like I'm so thrilled. For the teams that lost, I feel like I feel that soul crushing. We've all lived that. So anyway. Crazy. Hey, you guys, this has been so fun. This has been so great. I knew it would be. The hour flew by. You guys are, I meant what I said earlier, like you two are so well regarded in our sport. You guys are doing such a great job. It takes an egoless person, I think, to go from head coach to assistant coach, and your teams have been the beneficiaries of your great work. Your teams have done very well. I know that your fingerprints are all over that. So again, thank you for doing this. I want to say thanks to the folks at Netting Pros and pitchLogic for putting this on. we're going to have one more Sunday night conversation. So this is interesting. Next Sunday, I'm going to have my coach, Pat Murphy, and we're going to have Graham Rossini, who, if you're in college baseball, you probably know Graham. He was like the original director of baseball operations, then had become a director for the Arizona Diamondbacks. He's back at ASU as a senior associate athletic director. And you know, like Graham and Murph have been in the big leagues. And actually, this wasn't even my idea. We had a listener that called in and said, hey, like Murph has done basically everything. He's been in the big leagues for almost 10 years now. And obviously coach at the highest level, coached in the national championship game. So personally, that one will be very fun for me. It actually might not be that fun because there could be some stories told that night that I am not the beneficiary of. But anyway, we look forward to it. So that is it. Thanks again for everyone that's listening. Have a great week, and we will catch you next time on Sunday Night Conversations.